All right, welcome everyone. Glad to see you here. We have a pretty good group, so I'm going to go ahead and get us going on time tonight. And welcome Brittany as well. All right, so we're here in week 2 now. It feels like forever since our last go-to session, but I guess I've had a lot going on, but things seem to be going pretty well, I think. I've been working on your week 2 exploration tonight, and so you should see some feedback there. There's a few more I have left to go, so if you don't see your grade posted yet, you will. I have also downloaded the projects, the mood board projects from this previous weekend, and we'll start looking at those probably tomorrow. I always like to have feedback to you before the weekend comes around so that you have that to refer to before your next project is due. And I am a bit behind on the Photoshop grading, but hoping to knock those out probably tomorrow as well and get caught up. So look for that coming up really soon. Another point I wanted to make was in regard to the mood board project, and I don't think I commented on this last week. Something I do with the mood board projects is that I will make comments directly on your document and then return it to you. And if you edit, go back and revise that portion, maybe make some corrections or expand on some information or whatever is called for to address any concerns I had. When you turn in your next section of that project, let me know and I'll go back and check it, and you can earn back points. I can up to 10 points depending on what changes have been made and how much was deducted originally. But my purpose for treating it that way is, one, if you were working on a project in the industry and you were going back and forth with a client, that's generally how it works. You have these iterations where you send in what you've done, they give feedback, you make changes to make sure the project is on track to meet their needs and their expectations. Also, in my mind, learning is more of a process. So instead of giving you a one-time grade and then moving on, it lets you take the feedback, put it into effect, and kind of figure out what was going on at that point, and hopefully get a little bit deeper level of processing and learning. So that's just my approach, but just wanted to let you guys know that as we go into week 2. Yeah, Sam, your comment about a continuation of the grade. Each week's project is a separate grade, but you have a chance to go back and kind of revisit what you did previously, and you can continue to revisit the previous week's stuff throughout the month. So if we go into week 3 and you make changes on your image collage, I can still go back and take a look at that. But I just ask that you let me know that you've done that, so I'll know to look, because otherwise I'm just looking at the new material. So that is that. Let's see. As far as other updates, I can't think of anything pressing right now. If you're a campus student and you haven't signed up with one of the Hall of Fame groups, that's something that we're doing for the Friday Blend, then be sure to do that coming up at least by this Friday. Campus students will know what I'm talking about. Online students, it really doesn't apply to you. It's not something you have to worry about. Are there any questions so far? Anything I can answer kind of quickly before we get into the material? Okay, great. So this week is all about color. We're going to look at the use of color in media from a few different perspectives. Um, Color plays a pretty big role in creating an impression, in adding energy to an image or to any piece of media, setting the mood, telling a story, and establishing a recognizable brand. Those are a few of the things that we're going to look at tonight. Um, how many of you have ever worked with the color wheel in an art class or anywhere else? Maybe professionally. Okay, Garrett has. Great. And Asta as well. Okay. So some of you, but not all of you, and that's all right. I'm going to try to introduce the idea of the color wheel, and we'll be referring to that a lot. This graphic that I have on the screen is a basic color wheel, and that's really what I'm going to be using this week, is just this very basic color wheel. You can see some that go into really minute breakdowns of different color gradients, and it gets pretty complex. You'll see that in Photoshop when you're selecting colors. There's millions of different variations, but for our purposes this week, we're going to use kind of the basic color wheel with the primary and secondary and tertiary colors. So the color wheel is an arrangement of the colors in the visible spectrum. They are arranged so that similar colors are next to each other, and as it goes around, they gradually change so that those colors that are direct opposites on the color wheel are the highest possible contrast to one another. And it's actually, I think in the textbook reading that's assigned, it goes in a little bit into the optics as far as how our eyes process colors. And those two colors, when they're opposites on the color wheel, are actually competing for processing time, to use a computer analogy, from our optic nerves. And that's why they are so sharply contrasting with one another. So ultimately, this color wheel is kind of based around how we see, how we process colors in our inner eyes and in our sensory processing parts of our brain and so forth. Here's something that some of us at least will recognize. If you've ever used makeup, cosmetics, or if you're familiar with how this works, if you are, say you have dark circles under your eyes and you're trying to hide them with makeup, the way you would do that is to find out, first notice what color the discoloration is, and then find the right concealer to neutralize that. This is all based on that same color wheel. For example, I tend to have more purple kind of blemishes. So when I use a concealer, I go for the yellow, because those complementary colors, those opposites on the color wheel, cancel each other out in our vision, our visual system. And the same goes if you were mixing paints. Mixing those colors will kind of cancel each other out. Or mixing light on a computer screen or on a projector, those colors will create white light. But when they're placed right next to each other, like you see purple and yellow, there's kind of a more of a competition, more of a kind of a vibration of competing energy. And as designers, we can take take advantage of that effect to manipulate the look and feel of our images as well. Here's an example that was actually from the exploration. I can't remember whose this was. Actually, it might have been yours, Asta. Is that right? One of yours? When you look at this, where's your eye drawn to first? What is the first thing that really that you notice? Okay, so Asta said the background. A few of you said the background, but who was it? Garrett and Sam pointed out the girl's shirt, which, and my comment and my feedback was in regard to that. They used that cool teal background color and then purposely used the complementary color to allow things to stand out. The 2 awards that it won at Sundance Film Festival are in the complementary color, as well as part of the tagline. And based on the title, Me and Earl and Dying Girl, you kind of get the impression that this girl has some special significance. And notice how they've used the color of the clothing. As some of you mentioned, she's in orange, and that has that sharp contrast with teal, whereas the 2 boys are dressed in blue. So they blend in. They kind of fade into the background in comparison. Here's another example, and yeah, yes, I had a special guest appearance by my cat. They will pop in from time to time. Another example, and this wasn't one that anyone picked this month, but has come up previously. And this is kind of less to do with directing attention and more to do with creating a sense of depth. It's called, it's a phenomenon called the object field effect, I believe it is, where it differentiates an object from its environment. So by using these complementary colors here, red and green, they're allowing Amelie to kind of look as though she's moving forward towards you. It gives a sense of 3 dimensions. And also helps to direct, focus on her, but you do have that effect where it creates distance and depth. And actually, here's a counterexample that I photoshopped just to show how it would look without that contrast. Now it becomes a lot more flat, right? There's a less obvious focal point. So actually, with that in mind, looking at these 2 examples, the color wheel is always divided into 2 halves. There's the cool colors and the warm colors, based on how we perceive them in relation to temperature. When things are hot, when you heat metal, it turns red. Fire is red. It's we mentally associate that with a sensation of warmth, whereas cool colors are more like cool water or ice. And these are the blues and the purples and some greens that have that more chilly or calm feel. Another aspect of warm versus cool colors is how they affect our perceptions. Warm colors tend to look like they're popping forward, whereas cool colors look like they're receding away from you. And so just to go back, we have the cool green in the background and the warm red in the foreground. So it helps to create that sense of 3 dimensions and depth. And lets her stand forward as though she's a little closer. You'll often see designers make use of those warm versus cool colors in a lot of action films, as well as their posters and advertisements, because it does create that sense of depth. You'll usually have a blue background with orange or red characters in the foreground and explosions and so forth, because the warm colors are more action-oriented and the cool colors are more sedate and calm. So it both creates that sense of 3-dimensionality as well as gives you a little bit enhanced energy and excitement. Let's see. So going back to the color wheel really quick, there's a lot of different color relationships that artists will memorize and make use of. For our purposes, though, there's 2 principles that, if we just keep these in mind, you can really predict most color relationships, how any 2 colors are going to work together. And it's pretty simple. It's colors that are close together on the color wheel are very similar and have low contrast. So they will tend to be more harmonious. The farther apart 2 colors are, the more strongly they'll contrast with one another, and the more energy they will have when paired together. So when you have these highly differing colors from opposite sides of the color wheel, that's when you get these kind of action movie poster color schemes. Whereas when they're more similar and more harmonious, it's a little more calm. So you might have, say, your drama or your romance genre movie posters at that point. Not always, and I'll show some examples of why that is. But with those 2 ideas, your analogous and your complementary colors, you can mostly predict how colors are going to work together. Okay, now, so based on those ideas, here are a few of the most fundamental color relationships. The most basic is monochromatic. That means you have one single color in the entire piece. So whatever kind of medium you're working with, you're only using one color. This is a painting by Pablo Picasso. It only uses blue, but different shades and tints of blue. So shades are darker varieties, tints are lighter varieties. And so you can see, even using just blue, he's able to get that feeling of contour and depth and shape because of lighting and shadow. So you can still create a very elegant and very appealing image, but it just doesn't have the benefit of the color richness and the contrast that you can get if you have multiple colors involved. And monochromatic color schemes can be energizing or calm, depending on whether you're using cool colors or warm colors. And you guys had some great examples of this in the exploration this week. Gladiator is a great example of how it can be energizing and have a little bit of a sense of action if you use warm colors. And I had commented in the feedback on this one, as well as on the Resident Evil, I forget the full title. There was one of the Resident Evil films that had almost the exact same colors, that fiery yellow, that it almost looks like kind of the world is on fire behind him. And and then the shadows make it look very grim and dark. And if you think about what that movie is about, it is a pretty dark story. His family is killed, and he's seeking revenge, and goes on this entire kind of ordeal to achieve that. And so that fiery look paired with the dark, grim shadows is really very appropriate. And Harry Potter, I think this is Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. And it uses cool colors. It almost looks like it's snowing at this point. And you see Dumbledore reflected in the glasses. And if you're familiar with the storylines, things are getting pretty dark at this point in the film series. The story gets pretty heavy. It starts off very, very fanciful and childlike, and kind of grows more mature and more serious as the series goes along. So using those cool colors kind of gives that feeling of hopelessness and drama that's really true of the story at that point. Yeah, and to your comment, asked that there's a lot of blue in the Harry Potter posters. Actually, if you look at the early ones, the Sorcerer's Stone and the Chamber of Secrets, there's a lot of complementary colors. There's a lot of more warm colors involved, and kind of just as the storyline moves along and becomes more serious, the color schemes kind of reflect that as well. So this is what you can get with single colors, the monochromatic color schemes. Most often, though, you'll probably want to use a richer color palette, though, to give, whether it's a different energy, or just to really capture the feel of the message that you're trying to convey. So typically you'll use at least 2 or more colors. And that's where that principle of complementary versus analogous colors come in, depending on the impression that you want to give. Analogous colors are very similar. So here we have blue, green, and sort of a yellow-green. This is The Japanese Bridge by Claude Monet. And you can see how all of those analogous colors are very harmonious. There's nothing really sharply contrasting, like we would see if there was something red or orange or something dropped right in the middle of the scene. And that Bugs Life poster uses almost the exact same color scheme. It's fun based on the imagery, but it obviously isn't a blockbuster action film, because the colors are a little more sedate than that. And Angry Birds is the other side of the color wheel. This is the warm analogous colors. And this is getting into a little bit of color psychology at this point, because we have the red bird. Not only does he have angry looking eyes, And the title of the movie is Angry Birds, but we have that red color, which is often associated with anger. When we think of heated debates or feelings, we kind of picture it as being red or red in the face. And just a couple of additional examples. Look at this one in comparison to the Amelie poster we saw earlier. It's a little more flat, but the entire thing is just filled with the warm colors, with the exception of his tie, but it kind of has that upbeat feel that corresponds with the look on his face as well. Yeah, and Garrett comments. No, Sam. It was Sam's comment about the character standing out. Part of that is due to the what's called value contrast, and that's relative lightness versus darkness. His face is very light, whereas the suit is dark in comparison to the background. So it gives a little bit of figure ground contrast without resorting to a lot of really sharply contrasting color. And Pirates of the Caribbean. Actually, a really good comparison. The way, and you'll see this in a lot of examples, like going back to Gladiator. If you want something to be more mysterious, more gritty, a little more serious in tone, a lot of times adding shadow into that will give you that effect. There's not a lot of difference between this poster and this poster in terms of the color palette, but it's just the way it's presented, making use of shadow and darkness to give that sense of mystery. And our other basic color scheme is complementary. Now these are the opposites on the color wheel. And really be careful with this term, because sometimes we think of complementary meaning things just go together well, but in color theory they have a very specific meaning, so make sure you're using that term correctly when you do say colors are complementary or that they complement one another. What that means is they're opposites on the color wheel. They're very, very high contrast. And this is a painting by Vincent van Gogh. I don't have the title written on here, but I think it's Night Cafe or something along those lines. And notice how much the little cafe area stands out because of the use of complementary colors. The blue of the cityscape really recedes back and gives way to that warm cafe scene that kind of commands attention and grabs our eye. Interestingly enough, this is another Johnny Depp, but think of this one in comparison to the Mordecai poster from earlier, where it was warm skin tone against warm background and kind of creates a little bit more of a flat look, as opposed to the Mad Hatter, which is also Johnny Depp, with warm red or orange against its complement, which is the green of the background. That's a great question, Asta. about, is it strictly two opposite colors? If you technically, complementary colors are direct opposites. But if you have colors that are roughly opposites, so like your example was purple and red. Now, purple and red are still kind of close. But if you had, say, blue violet and red orange, the farther apart you get, the closer you're getting to a complementary relationship. So you could still describe that as complementary colors if you were using blue and yellow, for example. Technically not complementary, but they have that same contrast. So if you wanted to use the strict definitions of what a complementary color pair is, then yes, they're only the opposites, but effectively you can get the same or pretty close to that kind of feel from any two colors that are very far apart on the color wheel. Oh, hey, there they are. I forgot that I had this slide in there just to show some juxtaposition. And the Little Mermaid, using that warm color against that cool color field, it's almost like literally putting a spotlight on Ariel right there on her rock. And there are tons of other subsets of these. You have like split complementary, which is if we had, say, blue and then the two colors that are right next to its complement, so yellow orange and red orange, it gives a little bit more, like a wider variety of colors to use, but it's the same idea. You're using colors that are really high contrast. So technically, this blue, purple, and yellow would be a split complementary. But we don't have to get into that much, that level of granularity. If you describe that as complementary, you're correct. The last one I want to focus on in terms of color relationships is achromatic. Achromatic simply means no color. Chroma translates to color, so it's without color. So this is grayscale. This is black and white images. So it is considered completely colorless. Black, white, and gray are not considered colors in formal color theory. So you don't see them on the color wheel. They don't have complements. So they're something separate altogether. They're considered pure value. So like I was mentioning earlier, lightness or darkness and all things in between. But it is an option to use achromatic, black and white imagery. It can create a very distinct impression. It can be very elegant. It can also be very serious in appearance, depending on the context. A lot of times if you see some suspense movies or really gritty police dramas, they'll use an achromatic color scheme. 007 here. The Fast and the Furious, or the Furious 7 poster over here, uses it specifically to create a more kind of a sad mood, a very somber mood, because, and I always forget the actor's name, this movie came out right after that he died in a car accident. And this is presented as a tribute because Vin Diesel and he were actually very close friends in real life, so it's kind of his tribute to his friend. Paul Walker, thank you. It's something that you can do with achromatic imagery is what's referred to as an accented achromatic, where you just throw in one little splash of color on an otherwise colorless image, and it creates an immediate focal point. The eye is naturally drawn to that point. So if you want to call attention to something, you can present it in this way. This is from Schindler's List, which is entirely in black and white until you get to this point and you see the girl in the red coat. And you can create a lot of symbolic meaning in that way, as well as directing attention. Depending on what kind of meaning you want to create. Some interesting examples. Ghostbusters uses the crossed out sign, no ghosts sign, but the girl on a train poster makes interesting use of it with the symbolic representation of the train tracks. So those were kind of my quick introduction to the basic color relationships. Now, looking at what you can do with that is the use of color to enhance a story or a mood. I look at color kind of like the musical score in a film. It's not needed to tell the story, but it enhances the story. Just like when you have a musical score, it rises and falls with the mood of the scene. If you want to build suspense, you get that violin sound that we know from horror films. You can have really emotional music playing and it enhances the feel. Color's the same way. It's very subtle, but it influences how we perceive our media. How do you see color used here? What role does it play in this particular advertisement? Any thoughts on this? Okay, I mean there is a lot of red. It's the background. It's the color of the car. But as far as setting the mood or communicating the message, notice the tagline: to rekindle the flame of desire, you only need a drop of petrol. So you have two keywords there: flame, which it refers to fire, which is a warm sensation. This is a warm color, but also desire, which is a very passionate, emotional state. Both of those things are associated with warm colors, and especially the color red. Think about like Valentine's Day. Everything is red, and it's all about love and passion and romance. So it's that same idea. It's that passionate, emotional state that they're trying to connect with. Rekindling the flame of desire, in this case referring to perhaps the joy of driving this particular car. The car itself is red, which is very sporty and exciting. So it all works together towards that common message. Another association with the color red is also danger or fire or potential for harm. It can often be a warning as well, like a stop sign is a pretty commonly recognized example. And this is from the Age of Ultron, the Avengers film. And they've got that really kind of pervasive red background. It looks like flames, again, like the world is on fire. They use the shadow to create that grim impression. So it really conveys that idea that there's a threat. Besides the ominous imagery, it underscores that threatening look. And you start getting into more and more subtle examples of this. In fact, pretty much every TV show and every movie has a colorist who coordinates this. Whether it's picking costuming colors or the color of the paint on the wall or even how the lighting affects the color, because it enhances the mood. So here we start getting into a little bit more direct connection between mood and color. This is from a movie called The Change Up. You have Jason Bateman on the top, struggling with these toddlers. He has a troubled look on his face, and they connect that with the cool colors, which tend to be a more subdued mood. Can be depressed, depending on the situation, whereas Ryan Reynolds is there with the two young ladies and has, he's smiling and has the warm background, and which has the more upbeat feel. So in designing this, they have purposely chosen those colors to correspond with the moods that they were intending to capture. Two monochromatic posters as well. And this is an example of how context really determines things, because you can't really say this color scheme will always give this impression. It instead depends on the message and the imagery it's paired with. Thinking back to our visual storytelling lesson last week, it all works together to create that impression. With the Good Will Hunting poster, it's a very similar color scheme to Gladiator, but instead of this very grim-faced warrior, we have Matt Damon smiling with Robin Williams, who looks, like maybe he just told a joke. So instead of creating that really gritty feel, it creates more of a nostalgic feel and a warm and emotional feel. And this is really all about that point I was making, that whenever there's media being produced, especially TV and film, there's always a colorist involved, and the director is working with them to make these decisions. This infographic is taken from the series Breaking Bad. Has anybody watched that series before? Because there's going to be some spoilers if you haven't. Okay. So what someone has done is actually gone through each episode and recorded the dominant colors connected with each character in each episode. Crazy amount of work, but it gives us something really neat to look at, because if you look at, I like to use Jesse Pinkman as my example because he's such a dynamic character. He goes through a lot of character development throughout the series, but he's this young man. He's really hot-tempered. Runs off at the mouth a lot. Every other word is, a curse word. And if you look at his timeline, there's so much red and yellow and all these really bright, warm colors. So if you think of the term hothead, someone who does have a short temper, it's almost like a literal representation of that. These warm colors corresponding with those moods, those explosive outbursts. But looking at the timeline as well, you can see like right here, this is a point numbered number 3. It's probably really, really tiny on your screen. It goes from red to just a big block of black. At that point, Jesse is abducted by Tuco, which, if you remember, is this really bad guy. He's this drug lord. So Jesse's situation just got really bad, and whether he's locked in a dark room, I can't remember what exactly was happening, but the color associated with him is pitch black. Later, it goes back to the warm yellows and reds. But right here at this point, number 5, it kind of goes from a stretch of red to kind of gray. It looks like all the color just goes away. At that point, the legend says Jane dies. So his girlfriend dies at that point. So it's kind of like all the color really does go out of his life. He loses somebody who's very special to him, and so loses this passion from his life. And then he goes into rehab at point 6. So it goes kind of gray-green to black to gray. So it suddenly goes achromatic. So you see how the colors are really underscoring the action that's going on there. And here's what that means when I say the colors associated with him are red or yellow. He's always wearing red, whether it's his clothes, his hat, even the background. Notice these bars back here that are red with a lot of yellow. The car he's driving is red. That's what that means. It's the colors that are associated with that character when he's shown on screen. And that's all done very deliberately. Another example that I really like is The Matrix. And hopefully everybody's seen The Matrix at this point. I'm not going to apologize for spoilers on this one because it's old enough now. But this is an example of using color to set a particular feel. When we start off, if you've never seen the movie and didn't know anything about it, you might notice that things don't quite feel right. Just looking at the screen, it doesn't feel natural. The way things are colored and the way things are lit. There's this, like this picture of Morpheus, there's this green cast to everything. And that's done intentionally because they want you to feel like something is a little bit off because you're not really in the real world. They're in this computer simulated world of the Matrix. But when they get out into what is, quote, the real world in the film, now we have more natural colors. Things look more alive and vital and lifelike. It doesn't have that unearthly feel anymore. And then there's a third environment they go into when they leave the safety of their home and go out into this post-apocalyptic world. It's very cold. It's a lot of grays and blues and muted colors, and it's meant to feel very cold and lifeless. Everything is concrete and steel. So they're really using colors in that case to evoke those feelings. Whether it's kind of an unsettling unearthliness or a very alive vitality, or even cold, oppressive kind of lifelessness. And this slide was left from a previous month's exploration assignments, but it's really good to look at too, because these posters, of course, are both for Star Wars films, but notice how they're using color symbolism, especially in this original one. All the bad guys are shown in blue, basically, in the cool colors, whereas the good guys are all in warm colors and really stand out. It's almost like they're telling you these are the bad guys, these are the good guys, and it's not in any way how natural lighting would work because these two faces are right next to each other. But the lighting is such that it is, not at all what we would see in real life. Very similar in the updated films, except it's almost like they've reversed. Now the bad guys are in the warm colors, and then going into the blue, the cool colors with the good guys. I'm getting into some geeky territory here, but the story is more established now. It's 30 years down the road or more. And now we know that the evil Sith always have red lightsabers. The good guy Jedi have green or blue, but always the cool colored lightsabers. So it's almost become a color code now that's recognizable to fans. So a lot of times, if you know that there's that kind of set symbolism, you can leverage that within your creations as well, if you're dealing with that kind of subject matter. I'm realizing I don't have any of the question slides to see if anybody has any questions, but if you do, please feel free to jump in. Yeah, I haven't gotten to really examine the Rogue One poster yet. I'll have to take a look. There's an artist named Drew Struzan who has done most of the Star Wars posters, as well as Indiana Jones and Harry Potter and pretty much any big name film. He's behind it, but he for a long time used exactly the same color scheme in every poster, and it was always the blue and orange that we're all pretty familiar with, but has more recently started to diversify it a little bit. So beyond setting a mood or an emotion for a piece of media, for a film or a TV show, you can also use color to add emphasis. We saw some of these, some examples of this earlier. I actually stole this picture off of a friend's Instagram account. They had taken this when on vacation, but you can see how your eye naturally is drawn to that mushroom. Our eyes and our brains are geared to notice difference, any kind of break in the pattern, and that red mushroom in this field of green is a break in the pattern. And it's also a complementary color. So it's not only a break in the pattern of greenness, but it's as sharp a break as you can get. And media creators take full advantage of this. For example, from film, it really wasn't left to chance that you have Cinderella in this very pale blue gown set in the warm gold yellow of this coach. That is immediately where our eye is drawn to that main character. There's a great scene in that same film, and I don't know if I have a screenshot on my slideshow, but where they're actually in the ballroom and she's dancing with the prince. And you'll notice that everything in the room is warm colors. It's a lot of yellows, especially. And all the other guests gowns are also warm colors. So it's like they were purposely dressed so that they would not pull your attention away from Cinderella herself. Only she is allowed to stand out against that color scheme. So it's kind of somewhat subtle, but if you're aware of that, then it becomes really apparent that that's how that was done. Something more recently, any Disney fans know that the live-action Beauty and the Beast is coming soon, but notice that the use of complementary orange and blue to create depth. You get that background blue that's clearly set in a different space from where we're at, in relation to this scene. And it also, again, is a break from the pattern. It's not always necessarily the warm color that grabs our eye. It's just whatever's different. So the blue among a field of warm colors is going to still attract attention. And we saw these, or at least we saw the one on the left earlier, same idea, using color to make one element stand out. The one on the right is the same idea, this different color scheme, complementary yellow against purple. And I'm not really familiar with what this movie is about, but if I had to guess, I would say the girl has a particularly important role in the film, and that would be why, again, she's made to stand out and have particular significance. Here's Harry Potter again. This one is, I include this with the idea of maintaining attention. When in this particular scene, it's very fast-paced, there's a lot of action and movement going on. So in order to keep our focus on the main character, Harry Potter, they've put him on a background that's almost entirely the complementary color, the green color, which is complementary to red. Even these stands, which look like they're probably meant to be yellow, have a little bit of a green cast to them just to maintain that contrast. So as things are moving around and they're flying all across the screen on the broomsticks, you can always maintain focus on the hero. A way that same idea is used in a much more subtle way is in newscasts. You'll notice that backgrounds in the news studios are always blue, pretty much always blue. Sometimes there'll be other cool colors. Sometimes it'll look like there's a cityscape behind them, like a skyline, or monitors or something, like some other kinds of displays. But that's really put there to allow the natural warm skin tones of the hosts or the newscaster to stand out. It maintains focus on that person. Any thoughts or questions so far? Or examples that come to mind? All right. So the last topic that I wanted to talk about in terms of color, and this will be most relevant to your mood board project, is use of color for branding. We saw how color can create a mood, and that's really relevant at this point when we're talking about branding, because your brand is your personality. It's how your customers or your fans or what have you will recognize your particular identity as an organization or a product. For example, these are pretty familiar, and a lot of us really know these logos. We know the color schemes. Starbucks always has the green, the seal with the sea goddess on it. What happens when we reverse those color schemes? We still recognize the logos, but it suddenly just isn't what we're familiar with. It doesn't look right. It doesn't feel right. It's kind of like seeing a friend's face with a completely different nose or something along those lines. We don't unconsciously recognize it anymore. Similarly, FedEx and UPS, and UPS actually refers to their color scheme in their advertising, the gold and brown. We reverse those, and it looks suddenly off. Because a brand is much, much more than just the logo. It is the color scheme. It is, the slogans and every aspect of that company's personality, the tone of voice that they use in their marketing. All of these things are brand factors, and color is a big one. In itself can be easily recognizable. Even if you consider a country as a brand, red, white, and blue is always sort of a patriotic set of colors, because we, especially in the United States, associate that with our government and our country. So what you'll usually have in any organization and any brand is a style guide. These are swatches taken from the Full Self Style Guide, in fact. These are our colors. So anytime you see Full Sail branded material, like business cards, letterhead, publications, websites, you'll see these colors. This burnt orange and this, I'm not really sure how to describe this. It looks like kind of an ochre green color. Technically, it's actually a very dark shade of yellow, which you would never guess, but it looks almost like an olive green, with this silver color as sort of a secondary part of the brand. Primarily, these two are going to show up all over the place. If you look at our course catalogs, you'll see these colors. You should see them on the websites as well, in our syllabus, even in your mood board template. I did that intentionally as well, using these colors. And it's subtle, but it's persistent. And persistence is what really matters when it comes to branding. You want to continuously use that same style, colors as well as typefaces, and logos and motifs. Because the more you use that, the more recognizable it will become. So this week you're going to select a set of colors to be your personal brand colors for your mood board and for your visual mission statement project. So how do you go about that? Well, a lot of times you'll see things like this, and it's the color emotion guide, and it almost reminds me of like a horoscope or something, with your astrological sign meaning these specific things, but you really can't think of colors like this. I really do not like this kind of prescribed meaning. And kind of like how Sam said, meaning is everything, but I would say that context is ultimately everything. Because you can't necessarily say that blue is always the serious, dependable, trustworthy color, and yellow is always warm and cheerful and sunny, because we saw that yellow can be very dark and grim with the Gladiator poster, right? The only really consistent thing I notice with these brands is that the primary colors, like red, yellow, blue, tend to be the more conservative organizations. And I mean conservative in sort of more business-like, more traditional. So you look at some of these brands, you have Ace Hardware, you have Target there, Canon cameras, Avis, and Dell and JP Morgan in the blue, and HP. So, I mean, you do still have some more fun brands like Oreo, but you see a lot more of the more serious business-like brands using those primary colors because they're not as quirky, they're not as odd or artsy. And so we'll give that more business-like impression, whereas once you get into secondary and tertiary colors, like orange and green, or orange, green, and purple, then you start getting into the more quirky, more fun and odd brands, Monster Energy drink under the green, and so forth. So as you start approaching your brand colors and picking those, what I don't want you to do is necessarily just pick a set of colors because they're your favorite colors. You might start off with a color that appeals to you. Say if your favorite color is purple. But then what do you put in there to go along with that purple? Do you want it to be high energy and upbeat? Then you might use a complementary color to purple. So then you throw in some yellow or another warm color that's high contrast, like orange. Or do you want it to be a little more calm and reserved and maybe a little moody? And you can you can pair that with blue. A deep blue and deep purple create this very kind of artistic, mysterious look at times. So it kind of depends on that feel that you're going for. So really, you can use some of these charts as a quick reference, but don't rely on this. Don't just say, well, I want my brand to be exciting, so I'm using red. You can get an exciting brand using almost any color, depending on how you make use of it. The color relationships still apply. Like I mentioned, using complementary colors to create a more energetic brand. Intel is a business, a company that makes business machines or components for computers. And so they have a pretty serious brand color. It is blue, so it is going along with those prescribed meanings of being trustworthy and businesslike, but it's also monochromatic, so it's not really showy. In comparison, Firefox has complementary blue and orange, so it's high contrast. It has that fiery look, and it's a little more exciting in its design. And why would you say that BP has the color scheme that it does here? looking at that logo. It's soothing. Green does tend to be soothing, kind of instinctively. But why would BP in particular want to use this exact color scheme? And by the way, BP is British Petroleum, so it is an oil company. And yeah, as this says, environmental things, and that's on the right track. Think about the public image that oil companies have, especially after the Gulf oil spill from a few years back, and the oil well that caught fire and things. They don't have the best public image as far as being environmentally conscious. So this becomes sort of a PR concern. Yes. So making use of the color green, what do we associate with green? If you say going green or green initiatives, it usually means ecologically friendly or environmentally friendly. Recycling signs are always green. So they're creating this kind of subconscious implication that they're an environmentally minded brand. Not only do they have the color, but they also have this design that looks like a flower. It looks very natural, like plant life. So it is very much a PR concern. And you can make use of your branding for that purpose to create that impression. Whether it's accurate or not, I can't say. I haven't kept up with BP's work to be more environmentally friendly, but as a petroleum company, that's got to be a concern. Yeah, and Sam, that's a good observation as well. The Firefox surrounding the world. Setting the world on fire can sound pretty negative, but it can also mean getting them worked up, getting them motivated and moving. Set fire to something. It can mean setting a fire can mean starting a movement. So there's definitely some symbolism in there as well. So with all of this in mind, you can start thinking about your own branding. If you were to create your own brand as a media professional, or whatever it is that you do, or how you want to present yourself, what would those colors be? That's a rhetorical question that you can answer on your mood board, but start thinking about that. Start thinking about where you want to start on the color wheel. What color will be your base color, and then where do you want to go from there? Do you want it to be something that's more calm, kind of like the BP set of colors, where they're using those analogous colors kind of in the yellows and green region? Or do you want it to be high energy and upbeat like Firefox with the complementary colors? And just work from there. You don't have to have a super color-rich color palette with multiple color swatches. You can have one or two colors and have a perfectly good brand. That's something to start thinking about. Also, when you start doing the Photoshop practice for this week, I'd really like for you to think about how you can use these ideas to change the impression of those practice photos. Do you want it to be, you want to create a new focal point, or do you want to just change the mood of the image, or what have you? And start working with some of those ideas. Yes, that's right, Asta. It's you will select your color scheme, and the mood board has little swatches included already, and really all you have to do is change the color to the ones that you want, and then record the color codes. And that's actually a good point to mention is color codes. You'll see a space provided for 3 different color codes. There's RGB, which means red, green, blue. There's CMYK, which means cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. K stands for black. And then hexadecimal or hex codes. Every color that's produced digitally has a color code, a set of color codes, and they're used to reproduce that color. So if I wanted to, say, create this exact same color of magenta over and over again, I could use that code and it would always come out the same. Without it, it's kind of guesswork. So by recording those color codes in your document, you guarantee that if you use that color again later, you can always get the same result. CMYK color codes are used for printers. So if you were sending documents off to be printed and published, that would be the color code that you would use. RGB is typically used for digital media. And hex codes are also used in other digital disciplines, especially web design and graphic design. So they all have different uses. If you're working as part of a team with some graphic artists or web designers, what have you, it would be important for you to share those color codes with them so that they could keep things consistent. And okay, and the question was, do you get to change it later, or do you have to work with the same color for the brand? You're free to change it if you want. And really, for this month, the same rules apply. If I give some feedback and you want to change your color scheme as a result, you can, and then resubmit it, and I'll look back at it. But you can also just change it if you decide you don't really like that color scheme anymore. You're welcome to change that. And then after this course, you can do whatever you want with your brand colors. Okay, so this tends to be one of my longer lectures because there's so much to cover with color, but thank you all for bearing with me. Are there any more questions before we wrap up? No, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to see you all tonight. All right. Well, if there are any other questions I could clear up, I'm happy to answer them now. Otherwise, I would be equally happy to let you go and get on with your evening.